Hi, and welcome back to Planmydisney Holiday. Today we're going to be telling a story of Disney's Pinocchio. This was published by Autumn Publishing. Pinocchio wants to be a real boy, but when he is led astray by some less than desirable characters, his world is turned upside down. Let's get into it. Once upon a time, in a quaint little village, a beautiful wishing star shone brightly in the evening sky. A cricket named Jiminy wandered along the village streets. He spotted a lighted window and went inside. Jiminy Cricket looked around, amazed. He had stumbled onto a wood carver's shop full of fantastic clocks, cute little music boxes, and a shelf after shelf of toys. The shop belonged to a kind old man called Geppetto. Jiminy watched as Geppetto took his paintbrush and carefully painted eyebrows and a mouth onto a small wooden puppet. Fiego, his cat, and Cleo, his goldfish, watched as he worked. "I've just the name for you," Geppetto said when he had finished. "Pinocchio!" He took Pinocchio on a little walk around his shop, balancing the puppet on his strings. Later, Geppetto and Fiego climbed into bed. Geppetto gazed out the window, looking up at the sky. "It's the wishing star," he cried. Then he made a wish. As Geppetto slept, he dreamt about his wish. He had wished that Pinocchio might be a real boy. Suddenly, a bright light filled Geppetto's room. It sparkled and grew into the beautiful blue fairy. "Good Geppetto," the fairy said. "You deserve to have your wish come true." She waved her magic wand over Pinocchio, saying, "Little puppet made of pine, wake, the gift is thine." "Am I a real boy?" Pinocchio asked. "Not yet," the fairy explained. "First you must prove yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish. You must learn to choose between right and wrong." The blue fairy told Pinocchio that he must let his conscience be his guide, and with a little coaxing from the blue fairy, Jiminy Cricket agreed to be his conscience. Then she was gone. Geppetto, hearing strange noises, jumped out of bed. When he got to his workshop, he saw his little puppet dancing and singing. Overjoyed, Geppetto lifted Pinocchio into the air and hugged him close. The next morning, Geppetto walked Pinocchio outside and pointed to all the children passing by. "They are going to school," he explained. "Now that you are a little boy, you must go to school too." Hoping to make Geppetto proud, Pinocchio hurried off. He didn't realize two sneaking-looking characters were watching him. "A live puppet with no strings," the fox exclaimed. "We can sell him to Stromboli, the puppeteer." The fox tripped Pinocchio with his cane. "I am J. Worthington Foulfellow, but my friends call me Honest John," he explained. "And this is Gideon," he added, pointing to the cat standing next to him. Pinocchio looked up at Honest John. "I have to get to school," he explained. Honest John convinced Pinocchio that school was a waste of time. "Come with us," he coaxed. "We'll make you a star." Back at Geppetto's workshop, Jiminy Cricket hurried into his coat and hat and ran out the door to follow Pinocchio to school. He saw Honest John, Gideon, and Pinocchio heading down the street in the wrong direction. Soon, Jiminy Cricket caught up with Pinocchio and tried to change his mind, but it was too late. Honest John had convinced Pinocchio to go on stage. They were going to see Stromboli, the puppeteer. Honest John led Pinocchio right into Stromboli's greedy hands. That night, Pinocchio made his stage debut with Jiminy Cricket in the audience. Everyone was amazed to see a singing, dancing puppet with no strings. When the show was over, the crowd applauded wildly, throwing gold coins at Pinocchio's feet. Pinocchio loved all the attention, and Stromboli loved all the money the little puppet had made him. Later that night, Pinocchio couldn't wait to get home to tell Geppetto about his new career. When Stromboli heard Pinocchio talking about going home, he threw him in a cage and locked the door. As Pinocchio cried and called for Jiminy. The cricket sneaked into Stromboli's wagon. Jiminy couldn't believe his eyes when he saw Pinocchio locked in a cage. As Jiminy was trying to free Pinocchio, the blue fairy appeared. When she asked Pinocchio why he hadn't gone to school, Pinocchio had told so many lies that his nose grew. Realizing what he had done wrong, Pinocchio promised that he would never lie again. The blue fairy agreed to give him another chance and set him free before disappearing once more. Jiminy and Pinocchio jumped down from the cage and ran home as fast as they could, knowing how worried Geppetto would be. He had been out all night looking for Pinocchio. In a nearby tavern, Honest John and Gideon were meeting with the dastardly coachman who had an evil scheme to lure boys to Pleasure Island. The coachman promised Honest John and Gideon lots of money if they could help him find boys. Soon, Honest John and Gideon were back on the streets, where they spotted Pinocchio. Pretending that Pinocchio looked sick, Honest John convinced the little puppet that he needed some rest and relaxation on Pleasure Island. Honest John and Gideon led Pinocchio down the street. They told him all about the wonders of Pleasure Island. Games, toys, candy, rides, and it was all free. Poor Jiminy tried to catch up with them, but again, it was no use. Outside the village, Honest John turned Pinocchio over to the coachman. Pinocchio climbed aboard a stagecoach filled with boys. The coachman cracked his whip and off they went to Pleasure Island. The stagecoach raced through the countryside, pulled by several scared-looking donkeys. When the boys arrived on Pleasure Island, they could hardly believe their eyes. There were fairground rides, lots of treats, and no grown-ups around to tell them what to do. The boys could be as naughty as they liked. Pinocchio soon made friends with a boy named Lapwick. If my mother could see me now, she'd have a fit, he explained to Pinocchio, who was about to sample some sugary treats. While Pinocchio was busy getting himself into mischief with Lapwick, Jiminy Cricket thought it would be a good idea to explore the island. He came upon the coachman giving orders to his men. "Shut the doors and lock them tight." Jiminy knew he had to find Pinocchio right away. He saw a light in the pool hall. There he found Pinocchio and Lapwick playing pool. "You're coming right home with me," Jiminy cried. Lapwick laughed. "You're taking orders from a grasshopper." Poor Pinocchio was caught between his new friend and his conscience. On his way back out, Jiminy saw the coachman and his men putting donkeys in crates. "You boys will bring me a nice price," the coachman smiled. Jiminy realised the donkeys were actually the boys of Pleasure Island. Jiminy ran back quickly to warn Pinocchio, but it was too late. Lapwick had already changed into a donkey and was charging around in fear. Poor Pinocchio stared in horror as he spouted his own set of donkey ears and a tail. "Quick! We've got to get you out of here!" yelled Jiminy. Pinocchio and Jiminy Cricket raced across the now deserted island, leaving the coachman and poor donkeys behind. They climbed up the cliff rocks and jumped into the sea. Exhausted, the pair finally reached the shore and headed for home. But when they arrived, Geppetto was nowhere to be found. A dove flying overhead dropped a letter for Pinocchio. The letter said that Geppetto had gone looking for Pinocchio and had been swallowed by a whale named Monstro. Pinocchio and Jiminy headed back to the open sea. At the bottom of the ocean, they began their search for Monstro. Pinocchio and Jiminy asked every fish and sea creature where to find Monstro, but no one would help. After searching everywhere and asking every fish under the sea, suddenly Pinocchio spotted Monstro just as the monster was waking up. Meanwhile, deep inside Monstro's belly, Geppetto was hoping for a miracle. "There isn't a fish left," he explained to poor starving Fiego and Cleo. "If the monster doesn't wake up soon, I'm afraid we're done for." Suddenly, Monstro started to swim. He was ready for lunch. He opened his gigantic jaws and sucked in an entire school of fish, and Pinocchio along with them. Pinocchio and the fish swam down the whale's throat and into his giant belly. When he got there, Pinocchio found himself in the arms of a very happy Geppetto. "We must get you out of here," Pinocchio said. "But how?" Then Pinocchio had an idea. He began chopping up furniture. "We'll start a fire and we'll make lots of smoke," Pinocchio said. "Then Monstro will wake up and sneeze us out." Monstro soon felt the fire in his belly. Inside, everyone quickly jumped onto a raft that Geppetto had built and paddled towards the whale's throat. When Monstro let out an enormous sneeze, he blew the raft out to sea. Monstro was furious. Seeing the raft bobbing up ahead, he chased Pinocchio and Geppetto, who were holding onto the raft for dear life. Monstro reached the raft and smashed it into pieces with his tail. Pinocchio, holding onto Geppetto, swam with all his might. Barely he managed to lead Monstro into a collision with the rocks. Pinocchio made sure that Geppetto got safely to shore. Geppetto came to and saw Cleo in her bowl and Fiego lying safely on the shore beside him. But when Geppetto looked around for his little son, he found him lying face down in the water. Geppetto gently picked Pinocchio up and carried him home. Once inside, Geppetto laid Pinocchio on his bed and knelt beside him, wishing with all of his heart for Pinocchio to wake up. Suddenly, the blue fairy appeared. She waved her wand over Pinocchio, saying, "You have proven yourself brave, truthful, and unselfish. Now you will become a real boy." The lifeless wooden boy was suddenly transformed into a real live boy. Geppetto was so happy that his wish had finally come true. He wound his music boxes and they all began to dance. What a celebration they had. The woodcarver, his son, the cat, the goldfish, and a wise cricket named Jiminy. And that was the story of Disney's Pinocchio. Thanks for watching this video. Like, share, subscribe and support the channel however you can. And I will see you real soon.